The morning sun peeked through the curtains as Elaine Washington checked her packing list one last time. For months, the family had been planning this trip to Coastal Shores Resort, and finally the day had arrived. The smell of coffee and pancakes drifted up from the kitchen where her husband Michael was making breakfast, a rare treat on a weekday morning. "Mom, have you seen my blue swimsuit?" Their daughter Zoe's voice echoed from down the hallway. At 12 years old, she had strong opinions about her vacation wardrobe. "Check the laundry room, honey. I think I washed it yesterday," Elaine called back, smiling to herself. These ordinary family moments were what she craved most. As the first black female senator from her state, ordinary moments were hard to come by. Downstairs, their son Thomas was helping his father pack the cooler with drinks and snacks for the road. At 16, he was growing into a thoughtful young man, though the recent incidents of police harassment toward young black men in their community had made him quieter, more watchful. "Got the sandwiches ready, and Mom's favorite sparkling water," Thomas said, carefully arranging everything in the cooler. Michael looked up from the pancakes he was flipping. "Thanks, buddy. Can you check if we packed the beach umbrella? Last year we ended up buying another one because we forgot ours." Elaine made her way down the stairs, tucking her phone into her pocket. She'd promised herself no work calls, no emails, no political emergencies for one whole week. Her chief of staff had strict instructions to contact her only for genuine crises. This time was for family. "Something smells amazing," she said, wrapping her arms around Michael from behind and resting her chin on his shoulder. 20 years of marriage, and she still felt that flutter when he smiled at her. "Special vacation breakfast," he replied, sliding a perfect pancake onto a plate. "The doctor prescribes proper fuel for road trips." Michael's work as a cardiothoracic surgeon usually kept him as busy as Elaine's Senate duties. Getting both their schedules clear for a family vacation had taken planning worthy of a military operation. "Mom, is this enough books for the trip?" Zoe appeared in the kitchen doorway, arms full of novels. Thomas laughed. "We're going to the beach, not the library." "I like options," Zoe defended herself, placing the stack on the counter. Elaine smiled at her daughter's love of reading. "Maybe narrow it down to 3? We won't have much room in the car with all our luggage." Breakfast was filled with excited chatter about the week ahead. Swimming in the ocean, building sandcastles, eating at the famous seafood restaurant on the boardwalk. Each family member had their own wish list for the vacation. "I've left my work badge and Senate ID at home," Elaine announced as they finished eating. "This week I'm just Mom, not Senator Washington." Michael reached across the table and squeezed her hand. He knew how hard it was for her to disconnect completely. Her election 2 years ago had thrust their whole family into the public eye. For Elaine, the weight of being one of the few black women in the Senate meant she rarely allowed herself to step back from her responsibilities. "Just Mom sounds perfect to me," Michael said. "Though you're pretty amazing as Senator Washington, too." By 9 o'clock, their luxury SUV was packed to the brim. Michael did one final check of the house, making sure all windows were closed and the security system was armed. Elaine helped Zoe settle in the back seat with her books, pillow, and headphones, while Thomas plugged his phone into the car charger. "Everyone ready?" Michael asked, sliding into the driver's seat. "Ready," 3 voices chorused back. As they pulled out of their driveway in the upscale Washington, D.C. suburb, Elaine felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. 6 hours of driving lay ahead, but the journey itself was part of the fun. No rushed flights, no formal events, just open road and family time. They crossed the Potomac River as the morning traffic thinned out. Elaine watched the Capitol dome recede in the side mirror, a physical distancing from the political pressures that consumed most of her waking hours. "Can we play that license plate game?" Zoe asked, after they'd been on the highway for about half an hour. "Sure," Thomas said, surprising everyone with his enthusiasm. As a teenager, he often tried to seem too cool for family activities. "I already spotted New York and Pennsylvania." The game kept them occupied as the urban sprawl gave way to rolling countryside. They spotted license plates from 15 different states before interest waned and the kids retreated to their devices. Around noon, Michael pulled off at a roadside diner that had good online reviews. The place had a 1950s theme, with red vinyl booths and black and white tiles on the floor. A waitress with a warm smile led them to a booth by the window. "You folks on vacation?" she asked, handing them menus. "Yes, heading to coastal shores," Elaine replied, enjoying the anonymity. No one here recognized her as Senator Washington. She was just another mom on a family trip. The diner food was exactly what road trip dreams were made of: thick milkshakes, crispy French fries, and burgers that required two hands to hold. They ate leisurely, laughing at Thomas's attempt to fit the enormous burger in his mouth. "I know we plan to drive straight through," Michael said as they finished lunch, "but there's supposed to be a really nice state park about an hour from here. Anyone interested in stretching their legs with a short hike?" The kids exchanged glances, then nodded. Even with their devices to entertain them, 6 hours in the car was a long time. The detour to the state park proved to be an excellent decision. Tall trees provided welcome shade as they walked along a well-maintained trail. Zoe took photos of wildflowers with her phone, while Thomas raced ahead to scout the path. "This was a great idea," Elaine said, taking Michael's hand as they walked. "I can't remember the last time we did something spontaneous like this." "That's what vacations are for," he replied. "No schedules, no emergencies, no constituents or patients." They spent an hour exploring the park before returning to the car. Zoe had collected a small bouquet of fallen leaves in different shades, and Thomas had spotted a deer watching them from between the trees. Back on the highway, the conversation flowed easily from topic to topic. Elaine asked Thomas about his college plans, still a year away but increasingly on his mind. Zoe talked about her science project and the book club she'd started with her friends. "How's Dr. Reynolds doing?" Elaine asked Michael, referring to his newest colleague at the hospital. "She's settling in well. Really talented surgeon. I'm hoping to have her take point on the Wilson case next month." These glimpses into each other's lives outside the home were precious. Too often their conversations at dinner were rushed, interrupted by phone calls or cut short by exhaustion. The landscape changed as they drove further east, becoming flatter, the vegetation more sparse. They were entering the coastal region and excitement built in the car. "Can you smell the ocean yet?" Zoe asked, rolling down her window and sniffing dramatically. Thomas laughed. "We're still at least an hour away." "I'm practicing," she insisted, making everyone chuckle. They stopped for gas and snacks at a small town just off the highway. While Michael filled the tank, Elaine and the kids went into the convenience store. Thomas helped Zoe pick out road trip snacks while Elaine grabbed coffee for herself and Michael. The store clerk gave them a long look as they approached the counter with their items. His gaze lingered on their designer clothes and Elaine's watch, then shifted to their faces. Elaine recognized that look, the momentary surprise, the recalibration of expectations. She'd experienced it countless times throughout her life, that split second where someone registered her blackness against her, obvious wealth or status. She smiled politely as she paid, used to brushing off such moments, especially with the children present. This vacation was about joy, not confronting the subtle biases that permeated everyday interactions. Back in the car, they munched on chips and candy as Michael merged onto the highway again. The mood remained light, with Thomas connecting his phone to the car speakers to play his carefully curated road trip playlist. A mix of classics that Michael loved, current hits for the kids, and soul music that Elaine couldn't resist singing along to. 2 more hours, Michael announced as they passed a highway sign. "We'll be there before dinner time." As the miles disappeared beneath their wheels, Elaine gazed out at the passing landscape. This stretch of highway cut through several small, rural counties, areas where her senatorial campaigns had never gained much traction. The political part of her brain noted the different yard signs and billboards, the changing demographics as they moved from one county to the next. Thomas was telling a funny story about his history teacher when they passed a sheriff's patrol car parked on the side of the road. Elaine noticed how Michael automatically checked his speed, even though he wasn't driving above the limit. She saw Thomas's easy smile fade slightly, his body language shifting imperceptibly more alert. These small adjustments were second nature to them all, the extra awareness, the careful adherence to rules. the subconscious preparation for potential confrontation. Even on vacation, even with Elaine's position and their family's status, those instincts never fully disappeared. But the patrol car didn't pull out after them, and soon the conversation resumed its relaxed flow. They played another round of the license plate game, debated where to have dinner once they reached the resort, and shared memories of last year's family vacation to the mountains. The highway curved gently eastward, and traffic began to pick up with other vacationers heading to the coast. The afternoon sun shone through the windows, warm and drowsy, and Zoe nodded off with her head against her pillow, one of her books open on her lap. They were only about an hour away from Coastal Shores Resort when Michael adjusted the air conditioning and glanced in the rearview mirror at their children. "I think this might be our best vacation yet," he said quietly to Elaine. She reached over and squeezed his arm, feeling a surge of gratitude for this time together. Ahead of them lay a week of beach days, board games, seafood dinners, and uninterrupted family time. No press conferences, no emergency surgeries, just the four of them making memories. The Washington family continued their journey, spirits high, with anticipation unaware that their perfect vacation was about to take an unexpected turn. The Washington family's SUV cruised smoothly along the highway. They were 3 hours into their journey to Coastal Shores Resort, and the mood inside the vehicle was light. Thomas had taken over DJ duties, playing songs everyone could agree on. Even Zoe, who had been napping, was now awake and singing along to the music. Michael kept both hands on the wheel, driving exactly at the speed limit. Years of experience had taught him to be extra careful on unfamiliar roads, especially when traveling through small towns. As a black man driving a luxury vehicle, he was no stranger to being pulled over for the flimsiest of reasons. "Should we stop for ice cream before we get to the resort?" he asked, glancing briefly at Elaine. "Yes." Zoe immediately chimed in from the back seat. "Can I get cookie dough?" Elaine smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. "I think we could all use a treat before we—" Her words were cut short by the sudden appearance of flashing blue and red lights in the rearview mirror. Michael checked the speedometer reflexively. He was going exactly 55 km/h in a 55 zone. He hadn't changed lanes improperly or run any lights. "What did I do?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Elaine turned to look behind them. Maybe they're just trying to get past us to somewhere else, but when Michael put on his signal and eased toward the shoulder, the patrol car followed, stopping a few yards behind them. The atmosphere in the car shifted instantly. Thomas sat up straighter, turning off the music. Zoe looked confused, her earlier excitement evaporating. "It's okay," Elaine said, trying to sound casual for the children's benefit. "Probably just a routine check." Michael took a deep breath and placed both hands on the steering wheel, visible at the 10 and 2 position. "Remember what we've talked about," he said quietly to Thomas, who nodded solemnly. The family had these conversations regularly: how to behave during traffic stops, what to say and what not to say, how to keep a situation from escalating. It was an essential part of raising black children in America, a reality that never ceased to sadden and anger both Elaine and Michael. They watched as 2 officers emerged from the patrol car. Both were white men, one older with a crew cut, the other younger with dark sunglasses despite the cloudy day. They approached the SUV from both sides, hands resting near their holsters. The older officer came to the driver's side window, while his partner positioned himself by the passenger side where Elaine sat. Michael pressed the button to lower his window. "Good afternoon, officer," he said, his voice level and respectful. The officer didn't return the greeting. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone immediately hostile. Michael kept his hands on the wheel. "May I ask why I've been stopped, sir?" The officer's expression hardened. "License and registration first, then we'll get to that." Elaine noticed how the officer's eyes scanned the interior of their vehicle, taking in their appearances, the quality of their clothes, the latest model SUV. "My wallet is in my pocket and the registration is in the glove compartment," Michael stated clearly. "I'm going to reach for them now if that's all right." The officer gave a curt nod. but his posture remained tense. Michael moved slowly, retrieving his wallet from his back pocket. As he reached toward the glove compartment in front of Elaine, the second officer suddenly shouted, "Freeze! Keep your hands where I can see them." The sharp command startled everyone in the car. Zoe let out a small gasp. Thomas instinctively reached for his sister's hand. "I was just getting the registration as requested," Michael explained, his hands back on the wheel. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," the first officer ordered. "Officer, is that really necessary?" Elaine asked, keeping her voice calm despite the racing of her heart. "My husband was only complying with your request for the registration." The second officer, still standing by Elaine's window, spoke up. "Ma'am, we need everyone to step out of the vehicle now." Elaine's instinct as a senator was to challenge this escalation, to demand an explanation, but her instinct as a mother was to keep her family safe. She knew that in situations like this, compliance was usually the safest route, however unfair and humiliating. "All right," she said, "we'll all step out. Children, please do as the officers say." One by one, the Washington family exited the vehicle. Michael was immediately directed to stand with his hands on the hood of the SUV. Elaine and the children were told to move to the side of the road, several feet away from Michael. The sun beat down on them as they stood on the gravel shoulder. Cars occasionally drove past, slowing to look at the scene. A black family spread out on the roadside, 2 officers standing guard. "Can you please tell us why we've been stopped?" Elaine tried again, her senator's confidence finding its way into her voice. The older officer, who seemed to be in charge, finally answered, "We received reports of a vehicle matching this description that might be involved in a recent incident." "What kind of incident?" Elaine pressed. "And what exactly about our vehicle matched the description?" The officer ignored her questions, turning his attention back to Michael. "Sir, where are you coming from and where are you headed?" Michael kept his answers short and direct. "We're coming from Washington, D.C. We're on our way to Coastal Shores Resort for a family vacation." "And what do you do for a living?" the officer continued, the question feeling pointed and unnecessary. "I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon at Capitol Medical Center," Michael replied. The younger officer scoffed audibly, exchanging a glance with his partner that suggested disbelief. From where she stood, Elaine could see Thomas's jaw clenching. Her son was old enough to understand exactly what was happening. They were being profiled, plain and simple. The matching vehicle description was a thin excuse for pulling over a black family in an expensive car. Zoe moved closer to her mother, whispering, "Mom, what's going on? Did Dad do something wrong?" Elaine put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "No, honey. Dad didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes this happens. We just need to stay calm and cooperative." The older officer was now examining Michael's driver's license and the vehicle registration that Elaine had retrieved from the glove compartment. He spoke into his radio, presumably running the information. Meanwhile, the younger officer began, walking slowly around their SUV, peering in through the windows. "You folks carrying anything in this vehicle I should know about?" "Only our luggage and some snacks for the drive," Elaine replied. "We're simply on our way to a family vacation." The officer continued his circuit around the car. "Mind if we take a look inside?" Elaine knew their rights. "Actually, officer, I do mind. Unless you have a warrant or probable cause, we do not consent to a search of our vehicle." The younger officer pushed his sunglasses up on his nose. "Ma'am, when people refuse searches, it usually means they have something to hide. Or it means they understand their Fourth Amendment rights," Elaine countered. Years in the Senate had made her well-versed in constitutional law. The tension in the air thickened. Michael remained silent, still standing with his hands on the hood of the car. He knew from experience that a black man showing any sign of defiance or agitation during a traffic stop could lead to dangerous escalation. Thomas had pulled out his phone and appeared to be recording the interaction. The younger officer noticed immediately. "Put that phone away, son," he ordered, taking a step toward Thomas. "He has the right to record," Elaine stated firmly. "It's perfectly legal." The officer's face reddened. "I said, put it away. Now." Thomas looked to his mother, conflict evident in his eyes. Elaine gave a small nod. It's okay, Thomas, you can stop recording for now. Thomas reluctantly lowered his phone, his expression a mix of anger and resignation. The radio on the older officer's shoulder crackled with a response. He listened, then turned back to Michael. Sir, I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back. Elaine's heart dropped. What? Why? Just a precaution, ma'am, the officer said dismissively. Standard procedure. There is nothing standard about this, Elaine objected, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain composed. My husband has done nothing wrong. You haven't even told us the specific reason for this stop. But Michael, seeing the direction things were heading, slowly placed his hands behind his back. The officer quickly secured handcuffs around his wrists. Zoe began to cry quietly. Thomas stood rigid, his fists clenched at his sides. Elaine felt a rising tide of fury and fear. This was happening to them despite everything, despite Michael's position as a respected surgeon, despite her own status as a United States Senator, despite the fact that they had broken no laws. How much worse was it for black families without their resources and connections? The younger officer began searching Michael, patting him down thoroughly while he stood handcuffed and humiliated in front of his family. Officer, Elaine tried once more, stepping forward slightly. I am requesting that you tell us the specific reason for this stop and for handcuffing my husband. The older officer turned to her with obvious irritation. Ma'am, step back to the side of the road. We're conducting an investigation here. An investigation into what exactly? She persisted. We are a family on vacation who have broken no laws. The officer's radio crackled again. He listened, then spoke quietly to his partner. Something in their demeanor shifted slightly. Sir, the older officer addressed Michael. Where did you say you work again? Capital Medical Center, Michael replied evenly. I'm the chief of cardiothoracic surgery. The officers exchanged another look. The older one spoke into his radio again, requesting additional information. Meanwhile, the younger officer had returned to their SUV and was peering through the windows more intently. Lot of luggage in here for a simple vacation, he remarked. We're a family of 4 going away for a week, Elaine pointed out. Of course we have luggage. The sun continued to bear down on them as they stood by the roadside. A few more vehicles drove past, slowing to observe the scene. Elaine thought about what this looked like. A black man in handcuffs, a black woman, and 2 black children being detained on the side of the highway. The humiliation burned almost as hot as her anger. Thomas had moved closer to his sister, speaking quietly to comfort her, though Elaine could see the controlled rage in his eyes. At 16, he was learning the hardest lesson of being a young black man in America, that no matter his family's achievements or status, situations like this would always be a possibility. The older officer returned to Michael. Where exactly are you headed again? Coastal Shores Resort, Michael answered, the repeated questioning clearly wearing on his patience. We have a reservation for a week's stay. And you can verify that? The officer asked. The confirmation is on my phone, Michael replied, then added pointedly, which I can't access with my hands cuffed behind my back. The younger officer had moved to the rear of their vehicle and was examining the license plate closely, as if looking for something suspicious. This vehicle is registered in Washington, D.C., he called to his partner. Yes, the older officer confirmed, looking at the registration again. Pretty nice car for a doctor, the younger one commented, loud enough for everyone to hear. Michael said nothing, but Elaine saw him close his eyes briefly, a gesture she recognized as him gathering his composure. Actually, I'm the primary owner of the vehicle, Elaine spoke up, though I don't see how that's relevant to why we've been stopped. The younger officer walked back to where she stood. And what do you do, ma'am? Elaine hesitated. She had deliberately left her Senate credentials at home, wanting to be just a mom on vacation. But now, with her husband in handcuffs and her children frightened, she wondered if revealing her position might bring this degrading encounter to an end. Before she could decide, the sound of another vehicle approaching caught everyone's attention. A third patrol car pulled up behind the first one. An older officer stepped out, a sergeant judging by the stripes on his uniform. He approached with a confused expression, taking in the scene. Michael in handcuffs, Elaine and the children standing. By the roadside, the two officers beside them. "What's the situation here?" the sergeant asked his officers. "Possible match to a bolo from county line," the older officer replied. "Running their information now." The sergeant looked at the Washington family more carefully, his eyes lingering on Elaine. A flash of recognition crossed his face. Meanwhile, Michael stood silently, the handcuffs digging into his wrists. Thomas had his arm around his sister's shoulders, trying to shield her from the escalating situation. Elaine took a deep breath, preparing to reveal her identity to end this farce, when the sergeant's next words changed everything. The afternoon, sun continued to beat down on the roadside scene. What had started as an exciting family vacation had turned into a nightmare, one that was all too familiar to black families across America, regardless of their status or achievements. The Washington family stood together, their dignity under assault, waiting to see what would happen next. The situation at the roadside continued to deteriorate. The Washington family stood in the summer heat, watching as what should have been a routine traffic stop, if one was warranted at all, spiraled into something much worse. Michael remained handcuffed near the front of their SUV while Elaine stood with their children several feet away, the distance between them feeling both physical and symbolic. "We're just making sure everything's in order," the older officer claimed, though his tone suggested otherwise. His partner, the younger officer with the dark sunglasses, muttered something under his breath that sounded like, "These people always causing trouble." The racist undertone wasn't subtle, and even 12-year-old Zoe picked up on it, pressing closer to her mother. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why are they being so mean to Dad?" Elaine struggled to find an answer that would make sense to her daughter without completely shattering her sense of fairness and safety. Before she could respond, the younger officer approached them again. "We're going to need to search your vehicle," he announced, not as a request but as a statement of fact. Elaine straightened her posture, channeling the authority she wielded in Senate hearings. "Officer, I've already stated that we do not consent to a search. You have provided no legitimate reason for this stop, let alone a search of our personal belongings, ma'am," the officer replied, lowering his sunglasses to look directly at her. "When people act suspicious and refuse reasonable requests from law enforcement, it raises red flags. We have reason to believe your vehicle matches one involved in a reported incident." "What incident?" Thomas asked, unable to contain himself any longer. "You keep saying that, but won't tell us what happened or how our car supposedly matches." The older officer shot Thomas a warning glance. "Son, I suggest you keep quiet and let the adults handle this." Thomas bristled at being called son by the officer but said nothing more, heeding the subtle shake of his mother's head. Despite Elaine's clear refusal to consent, the officers proceeded with their search anyway. The older one retrieved keys from Michael and unlocked the trunk, while the younger one began opening the doors to look inside the cabin of the SUV. Elaine pulled out her phone. "I'm going to call our attorney." "Go ahead," the older officer said, dismissively. "But we're conducting this search one way or another." As Elaine dialed, she glanced at Michael, who stood silently watching their belongings being rifled through. His face was a careful mask, but she could read the humiliation and controlled anger in his eyes. They had been married for 20 years. She knew how much restraint he was exercising right now. The call to their attorney went to voicemail. It was Saturday afternoon, after all. Elaine left a detailed message explaining their situation and location, then texted him as well for good measure. The younger officer was now pulling their suitcases from the trunk, opening them on the dusty shoulder of the highway. He pawed through their neatly packed clothes, holding up items occasionally as if they might conceal something. "Is this really necessary?" Elaine called to him. "Those are our personal belongings for a family vacation." The officer ignored her, continuing to search through each bag. He unzipped internal compartments, shook out folded clothes, and even checked the lining of the suitcases, Zoe whispered to Thomas. He's messing up all our stuff. Her voice was small, but indignant. Thomas nodded, keeping his eyes on the officers. I know, just stay cool, okay? This will be over soon. The search continued for what felt like an eternity. The officers went through every bag, every container in the vehicle. They even opened the cooler of snacks and drinks, examining each item before setting it aside. More cars drove past, slowing to gawk at the scene. Each time Elaine felt the weight of those curious eyes, the assumptions being made about her family. She thought about the conversations that would happen later. Did you see that black family pulled over? Wonder what they did? The sun beat down relentlessly. Zoe asked if she could sit down, and Elaine requested permission from the officers for her daughter to wait in the shade. The request was grudgingly granted with the condition that she remain in full view. As the search dragged into its 20th minute, the older officer approached Michael again. Sir, what exactly do you do at Capitol Medical Center? Michael answered evenly, though Elaine could hear the strain in his voice. As I told you before, I'm the chief of cardiothoracic surgery. The officer's eyebrows raised slightly. That's heart surgery, right? Yes, Michael replied. Heart and lung surgeries. The officer glanced at his partner, who was still rummaging through their belongings. There was a flicker of something, doubt perhaps, in his expression. And you say you're heading to Coastal Shores Resort? Yes, Michael confirmed for what felt like the dozenth time. We have a week's reservation starting today. That's an expensive place, the officer commented. $500 a night at least, I hear. The implication hung in the air. How could a black family afford such luxury? Never mind Michael's position as a top surgeon or the fact that such questions were wildly inappropriate during a traffic stop. Elaine had had enough. Officer, may I approach my husband? After a moment's hesitation, the older officer nodded. Elaine walked over to stand beside Michael, placing herself deliberately in the officer's line of sight. I want to be absolutely clear, she said, her voice carrying the same authority she used on the Senate floor. We have been detained for nearly half an hour. My husband has been handcuffed. Our vehicle and personal belongings are being searched without consent or probable cause. And not once have we been given a specific legitimate reason for this stop. The older officer's radio crackled, and he stepped away to respond. Elaine took the opportunity to speak quietly to Michael. Are you okay? She asked, though she knew it was a ridiculous question under the circumstances. I'm fine, he replied, his voice low. How are the kids? Scared, angry. Thomas is keeping it together for Zoe's sake. Michael nodded, glancing toward their children. Tell them I'm okay. This will be over soon. The attorney didn't answer. I left messages. It's Saturday, we might be on our own for this one. The search of their vehicle continued. The younger officer was now going through the glove compartment and center console, pulling out insurance, documents, napkins, charging cables, anything and everything they had stored there. Officer, Elaine called to him. May I ask what specifically you're looking for? He straightened up from his search. Ma'am, we received information about a vehicle matching yours potentially being involved in transporting illicit substances across county lines. It was the first specific allegation they had heard, and it was absurd. A family of 4 with luggage for a week's vacation, driving to a well-known resort, hardly fit the profile of drug traffickers. That's completely unfounded, Elaine replied. We're a family on vacation. My husband is a surgeon. She caught herself before revealing her position as a senator. Some instinct told her to hold that card a little longer. You're what? Ma'am? The officer pressed. I'm a mother taking her family on vacation, she finished. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. The older officer returned from his radio conversation. Jackson, he called to his partner. Anything? The younger officer, Jackson, shook his head. Nothing so far. Pretty fancy stuff for a family. Vacation, though. Designer luggage, high-end clothes. Is it a crime to own quality items? Thomas called from where he stood with his sister. Or is it just suspicious when we own them? Thomas, Elaine cautioned, though she understood her son's frustration perfectly. The older officer turned to Thomas. Young man, I suggest you watch your tone. This attitude isn't helping your situation. Our situation? Thomas challenged. You mean being black on this highway? Because that seems to be our only crime. Elaine moved quickly to intervene before the situation escalated further. My son is understandably upset. We all are. This stop has gone on for nearly 45 minutes now with no justification. The older officer studied her for a moment, then walked back to his patrol car, presumably to check on something. The younger officer, Jackson, continued searching their vehicle, though less enthusiastically than before, as if beginning to realize this might be a waste of time. Michael stood silently, still handcuffed, the sun beating down on him. Elaine noticed how he occasionally flexed his fingers trying to maintain circulation. As a surgeon, his hands were his livelihood. The thought of him being uncomfortable or potentially injured by too tight handcuffs made her blood boil. Officer, she addressed Jackson, my husband's handcuffs are too tight. As a surgeon, his hands are crucial to his work. Could you please loosen them? Jackson glanced at his partner, who was still at the patrol car, then shrugged. Fine. He approached Michael and adjusted the handcuffs, though not before adding, Surgeon, huh? Never met a black heart surgeon before. Perhaps you should get out more, Michael replied evenly. Jackson's face darkened at the comment, but he said nothing as he returned to his search. Zoe had begun to cry softly, the stress and heat finally becoming too much. Thomas put his arm around her shoulders, murmuring reassurances. Elaine wanted desperately to go to her children, to comfort them, but she was reluctant to leave Michael's side. The older officer returned from the patrol car, his expression unreadable. He conferred quietly with Jackson, both of them occasionally, glancing at the Washington family. Do you think they're going to let us go soon? Michael asked Elaine under his breath. They have to, she replied. They found nothing because there's nothing to find. The officers approached them again. The older one spoke first. Sir, what was your name again? Michael Washington, he replied. And you said you're a doctor at Capital Medical? Yes, chief of cardiothoracic surgery. The officer nodded slowly, as if processing this information for the first time. And your destination is Coastal Shores Resort? Yes, Michael confirmed yet again, his patience visibly wearing thin. The officer turned to Elaine. And your name, ma'am? Elaine Washington, she replied, still holding back her full identity. What do you do for a living, Mrs. Washington? She hesitated only briefly. I work in government. What branch of government? The officer pressed. Federal, she replied simply. The officers exchanged glances again. Something was shifting in their demeanor, though it was hard to pinpoint exactly what. The older officer's radio crackled once more. He listened, then responded in a low voice that Elaine couldn't quite catch. When he turned back to them, his expression had changed subtly. Mr. Washington, he said, it appears there may have been some confusion. The vehicle we were looking for has been located elsewhere. Elaine felt a surge of both relief and renewed anger. So you've detained us all this time for nothing? We were responding to information we received, the officer said defensively. Just doing our job. Jackson had finished his search of their vehicle and was closing the doors. He'd left their belongings in disarray. Clothes unfolded, bags unzipped, items scattered. Officer, Elaine said to the older one, are you going to remove my husband's handcuffs now? He nodded to Jackson, who approached Michael and unlocked the handcuffs. Michael brought his hands forward slowly, rubbing his wrists where the metal had dug into his skin. Can we go now? Elaine asked, though it was more of a demand than a question. We just need to finish some paperwork, the older officer replied. A few more minutes, Thomas and Zoe approached cautiously, having noticed the handcuffs being removed. Zoe immediately ran to her father, wrapping her arms around his waist. Michael hugged her close, murmuring reassurances. Thomas stood beside his mother, his young face set in lines of controlled anger. They're not even going to apologize, are they? He said quietly. Elaine put her hand on his shoulder. Probably not, honey. The officers returned to their patrol car, presumably to complete whatever paperwork was required to document this baseless stop. The Washington family took the opportunity to check on each other and assess the damage to their belongings. "Look at this mess," Thomas said, surveying the inside of their SUV. Clothes were strewn about, bags left open. Even the cooler contents had been disturbed. Michael knelt down to help Zoe gather some of her books that had been removed from her backpack during the search. "It's okay," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We'll get everything sorted out when we reach the resort." Elaine stood by the driver's side door, watching the officers in their patrol car. She couldn't shake the feeling that something about the officers' demeanor had changed toward the end of their interaction. It wasn't just that they had found nothing incriminating. There seemed to be another reason for their sudden shift. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of another vehicle approaching. It was another patrol car, this one larger and newer than the first. It pulled up behind the officer's vehicle, and a man in a different uniform stepped out. "That's a sheriff's department vehicle," Michael noted, straightening up from where he was helping Zoe. "Different jurisdiction from these county officers." The newly arrived officer, older, with silver at his temples and sergeant's stripes on his sleeve, approached the patrol car first. The two officers got out to speak with him, their body language suddenly more formal, almost deferential. The three officers spoke for a few moments, occasionally glancing toward the Washington family. Then the sergeant began walking in their direction, followed reluctantly by the two officers who had conducted the stop. As they approached, Elaine caught a glimmer of recognition in the sergeant's eyes as he looked at her. Her stomach tightened. She knew what was about to happen, and while part of her welcomed the imminent end to their ordeal, another part lamented that it would take the revelation of her position to make these officers treat her family with basic human dignity. The afternoon sun continued to beat down on the roadside scene. What had started as an exciting family vacation had turned into a nightmare, one that was all too familiar to black families across America, regardless of their status or achievements. The Washington family stood together, their dignity under assault, waiting to see what would happen next. The sergeant approached the Washington family, his gait unhurried but purposeful. Unlike the two officers who had conducted the stop, his demeanor was professional, his expression neutral rather than hostile. He removed his hat as he neared them, a small gesture of respect that hadn't been afforded to them in the last 45 minutes. "Afternoon, folks," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "I'm Sergeant Taylor with the Sheriff's Department. I was passing through and noticed the stop. Wanted to make sure everything's being handled properly." The two officers who had detained them stood a few steps behind the sergeant, their body language noticeably different now. Stiffer, more formal. "Properly." Elaine couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "My husband was handcuffed, our vehicle searched without consent, and our children forced to stand in the heat for nearly an hour, all without any legitimate reason." "No, Sergeant. I wouldn't say things have been handled properly at all." Sergeant Taylor nodded, seeming to take her words seriously rather than dismissively. "I understand your frustration, ma'am. May I ask your names?" Michael stepped forward, still rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had left marks. "I'm Dr. Michael Washington. This is my wife Elaine, and our children." He gestured toward Thomas and Zoe, who stood close together, watching the interaction warily. The sergeant's eyes lingered on Elaine, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Washington," he repeated slowly. "Elaine Washington." He studied her more carefully. "Ma'am, if you don't mind my asking, are you by any chance Senator Washington?" And there it was. The moment Elaine had both anticipated and dreaded. She had deliberately left her credentials at home, wanting this vacation to be about family, not her position. But now, with her husband's wrists still bearing the marks of handcuffs and her children's sense of security shattered, she felt no reason to hide it any longer. "Yes, Sergeant," she confirmed. "I am Senator Elaine Washington." The effect was immediate. The older officer's eyes widened in shock. The younger one, Jackson, took an involuntary step backward. Sergeant Taylor's face registered surprise. Then, something that looked like respect mingled with concern. "Senator Washington?" he said, as if confirming what he'd just heard. "I thought you looked familiar. You spoke at the law enforcement conference in the Capitol last month. I was in attendance." Elaine nodded, remembering the event. She had given a keynote address on community policing and racial justice to an audience of law enforcement leaders from across the state. The sergeant turned to the two officers, his expression hardening. "Officer Davis, Officer Jackson, may I have a word with you?" He led them a few paces away, speaking in low, intense tones that didn't carry to where the Washington family stood. But his body language told the story, the sharp gestures, the rigid posture, the occasional glance back toward Elaine and her family. He was clearly not pleased with how the situation had been handled. Thomas moved closer to his parents. "They're acting different now," he observed quietly. "Now that they know who Mom is." Michael placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's often how it works, unfortunately." "But that's not fair," Zoe said, her young face creased with confusion and the beginnings of understanding. "They should treat everyone the same way." "They should," Elaine agreed, her heart aching at her daughter's introduction to this harsh reality. "But they don't always do what they should." Sergeant Taylor returned to them, leaving the two officers by their patrol car. "Senator Washington, Dr. Washington, I want to extend my sincere apologies for what you've experienced here today. There appears to have been a significant misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Elaine repeated, the diplomatic language of her profession failing her in the face of such blatant injustice. "Sergeant, what happened here today was not a misunderstanding. It was racial profiling, plain and simple." The sergeant didn't immediately deny it, which surprised her. Instead, he nodded slowly. "I understand why you would see it that way, Senator, and I'm not here to make excuses. What matters right now is making this right and getting your family safely on your way." "I'm not sure this can be made right," Michael said, his voice low but firm. "My children have just witnessed their father handcuffed and treated like a criminal for no reason. That's not something you can undo with an apology." Sergeant Taylor met Michael's gaze directly. "You're absolutely right, Dr. Washington. I can't undo what happened, but I can assure you that there will be a thorough review of this incident." He turned back to the patrol car and beckoned to the officers. They approached reluctantly, their earlier swagger completely gone. "Officers Davis and Jackson," Sergeant Taylor said formally, "I believe you owe the Washington family an explanation and an apology." Officer Davis, the older one who had seemed to be in charge, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "There was a bolo, be on the lookout, for a vehicle similar to yours potentially involved in transporting illegal substances across county lines." "How similar?" Elaine pressed. "What specifically matched?" The officer hesitated. "A black SUV with out-of-state plates." "That's it?" Michael asked incredulously. "Do you know how many black SUVs with out-of-state plates travel this highway every day?" Officer Davis had no response to that. Officer Jackson stared at the ground, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "And the handcuffs?" Elaine continued, gesturing toward Michael's wrists. "The search of our vehicle without consent? Were those standard procedure for every black SUV you stop?" "Ma'am, Senator," Officer Davis corrected himself. "When we approach any vehicle, we have to consider officer safety. Your husband made a sudden movement to retrieve the registration which you had requested," Michael interrupted, his composure finally showing cracks. "After I clearly stated that's what I was doing." Sergeant Taylor held up a hand. "I think we all understand what happened here. The question is where we go from here." He turned to the officers again. "I believe you were about to apologize." Officer Davis's apology was stiff and formal, clearly given under duress rather than from genuine remorse. Officer Jackson mumbled something similar, still not meeting anyone's eyes. "We'll be on our way now," Elaine said firmly, not wanting to prolong the interaction any further. "But I want your badge numbers and the incident report number." The officers provided the information, which Elaine recorded on her phone. Despite their newfound knowledge of her position, Neither officer seemed particularly concerned about potential consequences. Racial profiling was notoriously difficult to prove, and complaints against officers rarely resulted in significant disciplinary action. They likely assumed this would blow over like so many similar incidents, but they didn't know Elaine Washington very well. As the family prepared to continue their journey, Sergeant Taylor approached Elaine once more. "Senator, I know this doesn't make up for what happened today, but I want you to have my direct number. If you have any questions or concerns about how this incident is handled, please don't hesitate to contact me." Elaine took his card, noting that it included both his official and personal cell numbers. "Thank you, Sergeant. I appreciate your intervention today." "I'm just sorry it was necessary," he replied, seeming genuinely troubled by the incident. "This isn't how we want to treat any family, let alone respected members of our community like yourselves." There it was again. The implication that their status should have protected them, that the real problem wasn't the profiling itself, but the fact that it had happened to a senator and a prominent surgeon. "Every family deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, Sergeant," Elaine said quietly. "Not just those with titles." He nodded, acknowledging her point. "You're right, of course. I hope you'll still be able to enjoy your vacation despite this unfortunate start." The Washington family got back into their SUV, Michael taking the driver's seat once more. The inside of the vehicle was a mess, their belongings strewn about, luggage partially unpacked. Even the snacks in the cooler had been disturbed. It would take time to reorganize everything once they reached the resort. As Michael pulled back onto the highway, a heavy silence filled the car. The excitement and anticipation they had felt just an hour ago had been replaced by a complex mix of emotions: anger, humiliation, relief that it hadn't escalated further, and a deep sadness that this was still their reality in 2025. Zoe was the first to break the silence. "Mom, does this happen to other families too?" Elaine turned in her seat to look at her daughter, trying to decide how honest to be. She had always believed in being truthful with her children, even about difficult topics, but she also wanted to protect them from the full weight of the world's injustices for as long as possible. "Yes, honey," she finally answered. "It happens to many black families, but it shouldn't. That's why it's important for people like us who have a voice to speak up about it." "But they only stopped being mean when they found out you're a senator," Zoe pointed out, her young mind cutting straight to the heart of the issue. "What about people who aren't senators?" "That's exactly the problem," Thomas said before Elaine could respond. "The system only works for some people. The rest of us have to just hope we don't get pulled over or stopped in a store or questioned for just existing in certain spaces." "That's not entirely true," Michael said gently. "The system can work for everyone, but right now it doesn't. That's why people like your mother are fighting to change it." "But you got put in handcuffs, Dad," Thomas argued. "You're a doctor who saves lives every day, and they treated you like a criminal. Mom's a senator, and they still pulled us over and searched our car. If it happens to us, what chance does anyone else have?" Elaine had no easy answer for her son's very reasonable question. She reached across the center console to take Michael's hand, feeling the tension in his grip. Despite his calm exterior, she knew he was still processing the humiliation and anger of being handcuffed in front of his children. "I'm going to make sure those officers are held accountable," she said, her voice low but determined. "This isn't going to be swept under the rug." Michael glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "I know you will. But will it make a difference? How many reports have been filed, how many complaints made, how many viral videos shared, and still this happens every day." His words hung in the air, the weight of them pressing down on everyone in the car. It was the question that haunted every effort at reform, every push for accountability, every hope for change. "I don't know if one more complaint will change the system," Elaine admitted, "but I do know that staying silent definitely won't." For several miles they drove without speaking, each lost in their own thoughts. The beautiful scenery outside the windows, rolling hills giving way to the first glimpses of the coastline, seemed at odds with the heaviness inside the vehicle. Thomas had put his arm around his sister, who leaned against him, Her eyes closed, though she wasn't sleeping. He caught his mother's gaze in the rearview mirror. "I'm sorry I spoke up during the stop," he said. "I know you and Dad always tell us to stay quiet and comply, but it was so unfair." "You don't need to apologize," Michael told him. "Your instinct to speak up against injustice is right. We just worry about your safety." "That's the impossible choice, isn't it?" Thomas replied, sounding older than his 16 years. "Stay quiet and safe, or speak up and risk escalation." Elaine felt a surge of pride mixed with sorrow. Her son understood the dilemma that Black Americans faced every day, the constant calculations about when to assert their rights and when to prioritize their safety. It was a burden no teenager should have to carry, yet here they were. They had been driving for about 15 minutes when Michael's phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. It was their attorney, Martin Chen, returning Elaine's call. "Elaine? Michael? Is everything okay? I just got your messages." Martin's concerned voice filled the car. "We're okay now," Elaine replied. "But we were just illegally detained and searched by county officers. Michael was handcuffed." "What?" Martin's shock was evident even through the phone connection. "Are you serious? Where are you now?" "Back on the road, heading to the resort," Michael answered. The situation de-escalated when they realized Elaine was a senator. "I want to file a formal complaint," Elaine said, "and I'm considering other actions as well." "Of course," Martin replied. "I'll start the paperwork right away. Can you send me the badge numbers and incident report number you mentioned in your message?" "Already done," Elaine said. "I texted them to you right after we got back in the car." "Good. And are the kids okay? Were they harmed in any way?" Elaine glanced back at Thomas and Zoe. Physically, they were fine. Emotionally was another matter entirely. "They witnessed everything," she said simply, knowing Martin would understand the implications. "I'm so sorry," he replied, his voice softening. "Look, try to salvage what you can of your vacation. I'll handle the initial complaint filing. We can discuss further actions when you return." After ending the call with Martin, the car fell silent again. They were getting closer to Coastal Shores Resort now, the highway running alongside the ocean. Under different circumstances, the view would have elicited excitement and joy. Now it barely registered. "Should we still go to the resort?" Michael asked quietly, the question directed at Elaine but heard by everyone. It was a valid question. The incident had cast a shadow over their vacation before it even began. Part of Elaine wanted to turn around, go back to the city, and immediately begin the work of holding those officers accountable. But another part recognized how much her family needed this time away, perhaps now more than ever. "What do you all think?" she asked, including the children in the decision. "Do we still want to go on vacation, or would you rather go home?" "I want to go to the beach," Zoe said after a moment, her voice small but determined. "I don't want those mean officers to ruin our trip." Thomas nodded in agreement. "I think we should stay. We've been planning this for months." Michael looked at Elaine. "I'm okay with continuing if everyone else is. Maybe we all need this time together even more now." Elaine felt a wave of love for her family, for their resilience in the face of injustice. "Then we keep going, we enjoy our vacation, and when we return, we fight." As they continued toward Coastal Shores Resort, the mood in the car gradually began to shift. It wasn't a return to the carefree excitement of earlier, but a different kind of determination, to not let the incident define their week together, to find joy despite what had happened, to be a family first and foremost. The truth was, what had happened to them today wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't even particularly surprising, given the reality of being Black in America. What made it unique was not the profiling itself, but the stark contrast in treatment before and after Elaine's position was revealed. And that revelation, the moment when the officers realized they had handcuffed the husband of a United States senator, would have consequences beyond this highway, beyond this vacation. Elaine would make sure of that. The sun was beginning to set as the Washington family reached Coastal Shores Resort, casting a golden glow over the sprawling beachfront property. Under different circumstances, The sight would have filled them with excitement. Instead, they pulled into the circular driveway with a shared heaviness, the incident on the highway still fresh in their minds. "Should I wait in the car while you check in?" Michael asked Elaine quietly as they parked near the entrance. The question carried layers of meaning they both understood. Sometimes in upscale establishments, a black man entering alone or first could trigger unwanted scrutiny. Elaine squeezed his hand. "We go in together, as a family." They unloaded only what they needed for the night, planning to retrieve the rest of their luggage after settling in. Their belongings were still in disarray from the officers' search, and none of them had the energy to reorganize everything in the resort parking lot. The lobby was grand, with soaring ceilings, elegant furnishings, and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the ocean view. A uniformed staff member approached them immediately, smiling warmly. "Welcome to Coastal Shores. How may I assist you today?" "We have a reservation for Washington," Elaine replied, reaching for her purse to retrieve her ID. The staff member's eyes widened slightly in recognition, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Of course, Senator Washington. We've been expecting you and your family. Your beachfront suite is ready." Despite her earlier decision to leave her title at home, Elaine felt no desire to correct him. After what they had experienced today, there was a certain bitter satisfaction in watching her family receive the respect and service they deserved, even if it came with the recognition of her position. "Thank you," she said simply, accepting the key cards he offered. "Would you like assistance with your luggage?" he asked, gesturing to the few bags they had brought in. Michael shook his head. "We can manage these, thank you. We'll bring in the rest later." As they made their way to the elevator, Thomas leaned close to his mother. "He knew who you were right away." "The reservation was probably made under my full name and title," Elaine explained, though she understood what her son was really saying. The contrast between their treatment here and on the highway couldn't have been more stark. Their suite was spacious and luxurious, with a large living area, 2 bedrooms, and a private balcony overlooking the beach. Any other time, the children would have raced to explore the rooms, argue over who got which bed, and beg to go straight to the ocean. Today they moved quietly, subdued by the day's events. Michael set down the bags he was carrying and walked to the balcony doors, staring out at the darkening sky and the waves rolling onto the shore. Elaine joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, though she knew he wasn't. None of them were. "I keep thinking about how it could have gone," he replied, his voice barely audible over the sound of the ocean. "If that sergeant hadn't recognized you, if I had moved too quickly, if Thomas had kept recording after they told him to stop." Elaine leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the tension in his body. "I know." "Do you think our reservation was flagged?" Zoe asked from behind them. She had curled up on one of the plush sofas, looking smaller than her 12 years. "Is that why that man knew Mom was a senator?" "Probably," Elaine admitted, turning back toward the room. "The resort likes to know when public figures are staying with them." Thomas paced near the kitchenette, his adolescent energy finding no positive outlet. "I'm going to make a video about what happened," he announced. "People need to know that even a senator's family isn't safe from racist cops." Elaine and Michael exchanged glances. They had always encouraged their children to speak up about injustice, to use their voices and privileges to effect change. But they also worried about the potential backlash, especially toward Thomas as a young black man. "Let's talk about that tomorrow," Elaine suggested. "Right now, I think we all need to rest and process what happened." "I don't want to rest," Thomas argued. "I want to do something. Those officers are still out there, probably pulling over other black families right now. And we will do something," Elaine assured him. "But we need to be strategic about how we respond." Michael moved from the balcony to sit beside Zoe on the sofa, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Your mom's right, Thomas. This isn't just about posting a video in the heat of emotion. It's about creating meaningful change." "What are we going to do then?" Thomas demanded, his frustration evident. "File a complaint that will be ignored? Wait for the police to investigate themselves and decide they did nothing wrong? I'm tired of waiting for things to change." The raw emotion in his voice silenced the room. For a moment, there was only the sound of the waves through the open balcony doors and the distant laughter of other guests enjoying their vacations, without the weight of what the Washington family carried. "I'm not going to let this be ignored," Elaine said finally, her voice taking on the tone she used on the Senate floor when arguing for legislation she believed in passionately. "I made a choice when I entered politics, to use my position to create change. What happened today is exactly why I made that choice." She crossed the room to where her purse lay on a side table and pulled out her phone. "I'm going to call my chief of staff." "Now?" Michael asked. "I thought we agreed to disconnect from work during this vacation." "This isn't work," Elaine replied. "This is our lives." As she stepped onto the balcony to make the call, Michael watched her with a mixture of pride and concern. He loved her determination, her refusal to accept injustice, but he also worried about the toll it took on her, the constant battle against systems designed to resist change. "Dad?" Zoe's small voice pulled his attention back. "Are you really okay? Your wrists look hurt." Michael glanced down at the red marks where the handcuffs had dug into his skin. He had almost forgotten about them, the physical discomfort overshadowed by the emotional impact of the day. "They'll heal," he assured her, pulling his sleeves down to cover the marks. "I'm more worried about you and Thomas. That must have been scary to watch." Zoe nodded, her eyes welling with tears she had been holding back. "I was really scared. I thought they might hurt you." Thomas stopped his pacing to sit on Zoe's other side. "I was scared too," he admitted, dropping the anger momentarily to comfort his sister. But Dad knew exactly what to do. He stayed calm so things wouldn't get worse. "I shouldn't have had to," Michael said quietly. No father should have to show his children how to survive a police encounter. On the balcony, Elaine was deep in conversation with her chief of staff, Leslie. She outlined what had happened, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "I need you to do several things," she said. "First, contact our legal team. I want to file a formal complaint against both officers, and I'm considering further legal action. Second, reach out to Sheriff Rodriguez. His department oversees the county where this happened. I want a meeting as soon as we return." Leslie took notes on the other end of the line, her keyboard clicks audible through the phone. "What about the press, Senator? This is going to get out one way or another." Elaine considered the question carefully. As a black woman in politics, she had always walked a tightrope when it came to speaking about race. Pushed too hard, and she risked being labeled angry or playing the race card. Stay silent, and she betrayed both her values and her community. No press statement yet, she decided. Let's wait until we've spoken with the sheriff's department and have more information. But start preparing talking points. This isn't going to be swept under the rug. After finishing the call, Elaine rejoined her family in the living area. The tension in the room had shifted slightly, still present but less raw, as if they were all moving from the shock phase into something more determined. "I've set things in motion," she told them. "But for tonight, I think we should try to salvage something of our first evening here. What does everyone think about room service and a movie?" It was a small gesture toward normalcy, an attempt to create a pocket of comfort amid the day's trauma. The children nodded their agreement, and Michael gave her a small smile of appreciation for the effort. As they looked through the room service menu, Elaine's phone rang again. It was Sergeant Taylor, the officer who had recognized her at the traffic stop. "Senator Washington," he said when she answered. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I wanted to check that your family arrived safely at your destination." "We did, thank you," she replied, her tone professional but cool. "I've initiated an internal review of the incident," he continued. "And I've personally reviewed the officer's body camera footage." This caught Elaine's attention. "And what did that footage show, Sergeant?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "It confirmed your account of events, Senator. There was no justification for the handcuffs or the vehicle search. The bolo they cited was for a vehicle with only the most general similarities to yours, and it was over a week old." "I see," Elaine said, unsurprised but still angry at the confirmation. "And what actions are being taken regarding the officers involved?" They've been placed on administrative duty pending a full investigation, Sergeant Taylor replied. I've also forwarded the footage and my report to the sheriff and the county prosecutor's office. It was more than Elaine had expected. Usually, these incidents resulted in paid leave at most, with officers eventually returning to duty after the public attention faded. I appreciate your transparency, Sergeant, she said. I'd like to review that footage myself. Of course. I'll have it sent to your office first thing tomorrow. After ending the call, Elaine shared the update with her family. The body cameras confirmed everything, she told them. The officers had no legitimate reason for the stop or anything that followed. So they're being punished? Zoe asked hopefully. They're being investigated, Elaine clarified. It's a start, but we'll need to keep pressing for real accountability. Thomas seemed slightly mollified by this news, though still frustrated. Will we get to see the footage? Yes, Elaine confirmed. It's being sent to my office tomorrow. They ordered room service, comfort food that none of them had much appetite for but went through the motions of eating anyway. They found a lighthearted movie that no one really watched, their minds still processing the day's events. But they were together, safe in their luxury suite, when so many other families who experienced similar treatment had no recourse, no sergeant to intervene, no chief of staff to call. The next morning, Elaine woke early, stepping onto the balcony with her coffee to watch the sunrise over the ocean. Michael joined her a few minutes later, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders against the morning chill. The kids are still asleep, he said, leaning against the railing beside her. First time Thomas hasn't been up at dawn in months. Yesterday took a lot out of all of us, Elaine replied, sipping her coffee. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky change colors and listening to the rhythm of the waves. Despite everything, there was something healing about the vastness of the ocean, the constancy of its movement. I've been thinking, Michael said finally, about what comes next. Elaine turned to look at him. What do you mean? This incident, it's not just about filing complaints or getting those specific officers disciplined. It's an opportunity to push for more systemic change. He met her eyes. If you want to use what happened to us as a platform for that, I support you completely. The offer meant more than he could know. Michael had always been supportive of her political career, but he valued their privacy. Bringing their personal experiences into the public sphere would change that, opening their family to scrutiny and potentially making them targets. Are you sure? She asked. Once we take that step, we can't.